Hey, Peter.
Hi, Catherine.
So happy to have you here and catching up with you. And you now know that I've been doing this series of interviews on those of us that were with the Enneagram for many years and saw a lot of the changes. And the magic is that with each person that I've met, there are pieces that the rest of us didn't know. And putting it all together cleared up some misunderstandings or perhaps unknown factors. Like when I was interviewing Claudio Naranjo in 1996, he gave me a set of facts that had been different than I received through Kathy Spieth's work. And I thought, okay, but if we look at it from this lens, it's still accurate. And then when I interviewed Patrick O'Leary and Jerry Wagner, who we'll be teaching with soon in Las Vegas. But it seemed like there were errors, but if we looked at it with all the missing pieces together, it made sense and we defined it a little more thoroughly. So you have a piece of the history that's really important. You were in the Berkeley area. So what made you interested in the Enneagram and when did you learn about the Enneagram?
Well, I was there as a young kind of holistic counselor and body-based therapist. I had come out with my partner at that time to really learn about the holistic health stuff and the working with the body because that's what we needed at the time. And we had a center in Berkeley, a holistic center. It actually had this big dance floor, and so we could do a lot of really fun stuff. It had some offices in the back, and so what's my point here? Part of being in Berkeley at that time, in that kind of cohort, you might say, that certain young people in the, holistic health area or the transpersonal psychology was happening then too.
Yes, absolutely.
And the California Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, last is no longer with us, but so we were in that, and Helen Palmer was kind of our kind of trusted consultant, teacher of meditation, teacher of intuition. She would do these readings for us because she was a highly skilled intuitive.
Yes.
And so one year, I guess what was 1978, she actually called the house. I was living in a collective house with some other folks, mostly women who had been working with Helen pretty closely. I had done some stuff with Helen. And she called the house and she said, there's this new class happening, you should go. And it was because Helen said, we said, okay, fine, we'll go, whatever. We didn't know what it was. Turned out it was the first public Enneagram class that was being taught by Kathleen Spieth. And the first class was at her home, and there was a line down the block.
I
The
believe it.
last people in the door. The second week, she moved it to the Baptist Seminary of the West, interestingly enough, kind of, near the campus, the
Yeah,
university campus.
yeah.
So that was my introduction. Yeah, the handout.
Notes that were
Yeah,
disseminated, Naranjo took from Ichazo that then she put into her training manual for
right.
when she taught the class at ITP. So I know what you got then, pretty
I
much.
mean, I have it still right here. I mean, it's there. I save them. I mean, we've gone. I mean, this was many, many years ago, so I don't know to what degree they're relevant today, but
Oh, they are.
there,
Believe
there's
me.
some great stuff there, in a very undeveloped form, right?
Yes, yes. But you know what? As a result of that training, we didn't have to unlearn things. Whereas a lot of other people, if they came through certain schools of thought, did not know about subtypes. I mean, Naranjo said he didn't teach it in its entirety until 1996, but most fives feel that way. They want to gather as much data as they can.
Yeah.
And he was kind enough to teach them in 96 because my research validated what he had found. So he wanted to explore it, co-create that training, and we did. But what did you think of that first training?
Well, this was a panel class, and every week there'd be a panel of types up there, and I thought it was great. I mean, here's these people, they look different, they're different ages, different genders, but you could really pick up the theme. in terms not only what they were saying, but how they were saying it. And, as a body type, I was kind of sensing this, and it's like, this was really cool way to learn psychology. And then it came to my night.
Yeah.
I fell off the chair. I mean, you know what I mean? I wasn't up on the panel. I was in the back of the room, and I was just like amazed that here was a mirror being held up to me about kind of how I participated in the world, my personality, and of course, deeper than that, it was my archetype. You know what I mean? And it was so great for about a month or two. And then the other shoe dropped. You know what I mean? It's like all of a sudden, it's like I looked at all the like, oh, there's a lot of work here to be done. So,
Yeah.
but the first month or two, I mean, I just felt so happy to have met this incredibly accurate description of people and how we form ourselves and how we are formed. And it just changed my life forever, right at that, the first
Mine as
10
well.
minutes.
And that is the experience of eights, is that when we learn that the concept of eightness, other people shared it, it was, oh,
Right. It was
okay.
shared by others. Yes. Yeah.
Because a lot of times we stand out like a sore thumb in certain social situations or what have you. And I just think, well, why aren't people honest?
Right.
Or why don't people just tell the truth, tell it like it is? Why do they
Right.
couch things in a convoluted way? But then when I learned there were other people like that, and those were the eights, even
Right.
though I had studied many typologies, Peter, by that period of time, it's still just, and I didn't find the Enneagram until 1985. So you were finding it a lot earlier. I was still teaching Myers-Briggs.
Right.
And it was foundationally important because all these other systems, body language, behavioral qualities, micro expressions, archetypes, visual archetypes, everything you could think of, you could put into the Enneagram. If you started with the Enneagram, you could then take all these typologies, Sheldon's body type, everything else on top as variations of the Enneagram. But you
Right.
couldn't do it the other way around.
That's correct. Right.
And
There
it
was
was
something very fundamental about
very
not
fundamental.
just personality types, but character structures. It
Yeah.
runs deep. You know what I'm
Core
saying?
energetics, all of it. Yes,
Yeah.
very, very deep.
And so here was something foundational that was like that organized psychology in a way that made it accessible. And the types were out there in the psychological literature. Before we had books, we would go to different sources and go, oh, they're talking about our Enneagram types, but they
Yes,
were dispersed, right?
exactly.
And they were highlighting the problem side, of course, since that's the way psychology was, and to some
Yes,
degree still is, although it's
yes,
changing. But it was the things that are wrong with people. But some of the descriptions were brilliant, even to this day. Karen Horney's descriptions, or
yeah,
David Shapiro's descriptions of neurotic styles. I mean,
yes.
great stuff. It's just kind of a little too weighted on the negative.
like Naranjo's book, is you have to really understand that Naranjo as a 5, he didn't want to talk about neutral qualities of the types or positive because he thought there's still a symptom of suffering. So he wanted to alleviate the suffering with people and thought that that could be accomplished by looking at the problem.
Sure.
That's why a lot of people can't take his book. I see, kids in the hall where they go, I'm going to pinch your head up just at a distance, like someone you're mad at. I mean, that's sadistic, but we're never going to do that, right? It's just the fact that we'd even think it, like crush you like a bug or whatever. And that's what most human beings do when it's
Right.
socially inappropriate to do anything else. You might think a thought, but
In those early years, a lot of people were not, they couldn't, I want to say they couldn't handle it, but it just wasn't for them. It was just too, it wasn't there. They weren't at a place in their lives or in their development that this was going to be useful because
yes,
I'm sure they needed a lot more, acceptance and kind of support and welcoming. And so there was that. And I think we're doing a lot better these days, right?
yes, and we are. We are.
Celebrating. I mean, one thing, we became parents and had kids, right? And so and the kids are beautiful and they started having personalities. And it's like, okay, all these personalities are wonderful and part of the human community. And we could reflect that to ourselves. So I think,
Pretty amazing involving children, because I can see it at birth, but then you kind of need to see it because of the micro expressions. And then when they can talk, the language that they choose. But it's so wonderful just to help them find it themselves. And, the first time I had Spencer on a panel, he was like 9 or 10, but there was a 70-year-old 8 on the panel, a male. And every time either one of them said anything, and there were 5 people, but they were so similar. They're both sexual 8s, same tritype actually, the more emotional 8, the 8-4-6, that they'd get up and high five each other. And then David Daniels said, we've got to teach the kids too. But there were some people that were uncomfortable with that because they felt like children didn't have a way of knowing. So they asked questions, and I was teaching the panel, so I was answering the questions, and David Daniels came up to the mic and said, no, didn't he do a good job of describing his internal experience? And why would the gentleman to his right have the same experience? We do know. I always loved David Daniels for that. He could just logically put
yeah.
things into
Well,
perspective.
that was, I think I was there for that panel, and it was just so clear and embodied with Spencer. Now, that was Spencer. Now, other kids probably would have had a different,
Spencer
expression,
was
but
born self-aware.
he was, he was his mother's son, and so
Yeah.
it was easy for him to rise to the occasion.
And he never didn't know it, because I was probably a month pregnant with Spencer when I learned about the Enneagram. So he never didn't know the Enneagram.
Right. Yeah, got it. So, I mean, it's good psychology, and why not teach psychology to young people? They need psychology, you know, again,
Yes.
as long as there's a balance between,
Yeah.
there's a problem, there are difficulties, but there's also these wonderful qualities in all the types. I really believe that. Enneagram helped me get that message, you know what I mean? Because I just couldn't. There are some people I realize now, some types that it was just so hard for me to understand why they were like that, how they could be like that, what was their problem, you know what I mean? And the Enneagram has really given me the ability to understand, to empathize, and not only that, but to actually appreciate and celebrate people who before I would have never been able to get along with.
That's true. I would have, as my mother said, off with their heads. It would be like, wait, you're not telling the truth. Yeah, there'd be no interest in knowing the person further. And the Enneagram gave me a way to realize they were telling the truth. It
Right.
was just their truth. And
There
what
was.
I had
Yeah.
to learn is that I had my own truth as my bias, and that everybody has a bias
Right.
around their truth, and that my truth wasn't the truth,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
was life-changing for me.
And life-changing for many of us, I think, actually, and probably still is, you know what I mean? Even people who just even at the beginning level of the Enneagram, of learning the Enneagram, just to understand that there are these 9 ways that they all work. They're all coherent. Yes, there are problems, there are challenges, but they're all representations of different parts of the human community. And we're here for a reason. There's a reason the 9 types are here. We need
For
all of them.
sure, we need them. And we need all variations, whether it's their subtypes, their tritypes. We need their skills, whatever their Myers-Briggs types are, and all together, a community thrives because you have all these points of view that are inherently valid.
Right.
So,
And that it's possible for us to get along. And that's
yeah,
something I think there's a bigger ramifications for the communities and for societies. Like there are ways that we can actually get along with people who are very different from us.
and even if we originally look at something from a more defended place, we have a way to observe it or evaluate it and then change. Whereas the other systems weren't good at naming that. And boy, I really studied systems. And it was not they had formulas. I'm not negating the formulas, but the Enneagram kind of addressed that more hidden quality, the hidden motivation that was a result of the idealized image, the core fear, and then the defense strategy that defended that idealized image.
Right. Yeah.
So
Well,
when you,
yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was just responding to the defenses. I mean, it's something that I think we got early on. Although I had to kind of pull to me, what to me are the three basic elements of the defense system: the idealization, the avoidance, and the defense mechanism. That
Yep,
was all there in Ichazo's work. You
that's
know,
right.
it was not connected, but when you put those together, that is such great psychology. You know what I mean? It's just so useful for working on ourselves, for understanding the internal resistance to growth and why it's there, and there are good reasons for it being there, and how we again engage the resistance of the type structure so that development can happen. Without engaging the resistance, we're just not going to get very far. Right. And that's from Gurdjieff, it's from Wilhelm Reich, it's from a lot of different places. We've got to get those three forces working together, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. That's so important. And here's the irony is that when I was in the cosmetic industry and I ran that survey, it was on discovering the idealized images and
Uh-huh.
fears.
Uh-huh.
And
Right.
it wasn't until I came to the Enneagram and I had already had 1,000 responses, just over 1,000, from all these different walks of life, that there were clusters, word clusters that these types used, but I didn't know the Enneagram yet. I was trying to look at it from potentially Myers-Briggs or different systems that I had learned. But then when I saw maybe teachers use different names as the idealized image or the core fears, and I thought, wow, what I have are these clusters. I'm going to see if it's confluent here. Is it congruent? And then I immediately started asking our fellow colleagues and people that love the Enneagram, and then just carried on. And how is that? You see, it pre-existed my understanding of the Enneagram, but I didn't have the defense strategies or the way Naranjo had modified the mechanism to fit the type.
It's just it's precise and useful. Not that we can't access other defenses, we can, but
We
there's
did.
something that's central to and it's related to our character structure. It uses the strengths of our type, right? Eights, we talk about eights, it's like, well, I'm going to be strong and I can use denial and I can amp up and be, and it's kind of using what we're good at, the strength of our type, our archetype as well, and
Yeah.
using it to protect us. It's like, makes such great sense why we would pick up on that defense mechanism more so than some of the others.
Yeah, yeah. I just go, yeah, that's what I do.
Right.
It was just such a light bulb. And my friends said, oh, well, that's why you do this and you do that. They called me leader of the pack. And I wasn't leader of the pack. It was just 4 little friends. But to them, I guess there were 6 of us, but 2 moved away. But having said that, they still realized I was going to take charge, that if something went wrong, I was going to be the one to step in. And
Right.
it also enabled me to look at my elementary and high school friends and understand why they were the way they were. And
Right. And
they
that what
understood.
I'm fascinated by, and this has been developed over time because, I was a body-based therapist and
Yeah,
I worked with all the types and all the subtypes and got my hands on people and I used the Enneagram. It was just such a big help. Practitioners know. I mean, whatever your method is, the Enneagram is going to make you more effective because we can tailor the method to the person, instead of the other way around.
exactly.
But what was my point here? Oh, to understand that the body base, there are neurobiological patterns. We know as parents that the kids come in with a certain something,
Yeah,
show up clean slate, tabula rasa. They come in with a certain quality, a certain temperament. And I think all parents understand this, right? Especially if you have more than one kid. I mean,
yes,
and they
exactly.
show up differently. It's like, wait a minute, what happened here? The kids are supposed to be like this, but this one's not. And so you begin to tune in and this is the precursor to the type structure forming. You know what I mean? It's in the neurobiology of all of us. And to understand that stuff, I think, opens up so much opportunity for work. Like, how can you really understand type 6 without getting how easily triggered, how sensitive their nervous system is, their alarm system is?
Yep.
Right? We want them to just, okay, don't worry so much. Be happy. Don't stop what you're thinking about that stuff. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, but it's in their bodies that they're
And they're
so
meant to do it. Someone
tuned in.
needs to do that in the tribe.
Someone needs to do that, right? I mean,
They're the
thank you,
ones who,
sixes, right?
yeah.
It's just a lot harder in the busy developed world, I think, because there's just so much stuff coming in that I feel for the sixes.
Yeah.
It's hard for them to get back to zero, to reset, because it's just
It
so much.
really, really is. I remember Brandon, when he was a little boy, we would be driving in the car, and then he'd write questions on my hand while I was driving. I didn't have my hands at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, whatever. But he'd say, okay, mommy. And then he'd be telling me. So in a way, I was kind of cheating because I didn't say, oh, you can't tell me because then it isn't what you're writing on my hand. But he said, mommy, will you still love me if I do this? And I go, yeah, I won't like that you did that, but I'll still love you. But what if I did this? Yeah, same thing, Brandon. He just kept going. So then the scenario moved to that he'd be in jail for committing a crime. Would I still love him and come visit him? I go, yeah. And you could call me, collect, but I'll still love you. And then he goes, yeah, but what if I killed someone? I'd still do it. And then, but what if I didn't kill someone, but I committed a bank robbery? I go, no, I wouldn't come. Go, what? But I would tease him that way because he was now in
Checking out all the possibilities that could go wrong, you know what I mean?
it all worked out. Just that incredible kind of innocence on one hand that is kind of naive, and then a savvy, critical perspective of noticing everything that can go wrong. Yeah. As the parent of a 6, I totally understand how confusing they can be as children.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But do you find, Peter, there's a very high percentage of 6s that are mistyped in my experience. Do you notice the same? What do you do to help 6s recognize their defense strategy?
Well, because they're so good at thinking themselves into places all around the Enneagram, again, that's part of their gift, that they can think themselves into a lot of spaces. But it's like, I would say it's summed up in the sixes are on a journey through fear to courage.
That's right.
And that's the basic deal. And again, understanding how the alarm system works, I think the body base of the 6 type structure, and how it's going to put them in a position of fight, flight, or freeze. And so that explains so much around. I mean, how are you going to explain to beginning students that these two people are
Yeah.
6s when their behavior is completely different?
Exactly.
And of course, that's a very good question. So why are we putting them in the same Enneagram type? Because the alarm system is getting triggered and they're moving into fight or flight or freeze. And
That's right.
so that is kind of an inclusivity, I think, that a lot of 6s can go, yeah, that's me, right? In other words, I'm not this scared person who's always hesitating and having doubts. I meet things and I go out there and I can meet what's coming, and I'm strong about that. I mean, I gotta love them for it because I'm an 8 and I respect
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
it's coming from a different place. And I think there's a way to actually get 6s more tuned into what's happening in their
They hate the word coward, and
right.
that's why Ichazo changed it from cowardice to over adventurer. But when people think of adventurer in this system, the way we use the Enneagram of personality, it needs explanation because we think of someone who's more like a 7 or a 3 that likes adventure. But what he meant by that was risk taking. And each six can find the way that they take a risk or they rebut. So some sixes will say, oh yeah, I obey the rules, never have made a mistake. I go, wait, you've never made a mistake? You've never been disobedient, even when you were a little kid? No, no. And I had two people in a study group. No, neither have I. And as it turned out, they eventually, through the inquiry process, realized they had, but they didn't get caught, so they didn't count it.
You're right.
But their intent was not get in trouble. So it was a very meaningful journey, especially in a study group, to understand this natural defense. No, I can't make a mistake. It's not the fundamentally wrong, like the one coming from the gut. It's like, uh-oh, don't blame me for something I didn't do.
Right. Yeah. So as we talk, I think there actually is a way to help people who are sixes step into that position, you know what I mean? And to respect that and to bring value to that position, because, who wants to be a fear type, you know what I mean? Well, there's a lot more going on than just that, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so we just spoke about that a little bit. And to we want everybody to be able to have a positive identification with with a type, you know what I mean? And so so that they can say yes to it, like, yeah, that expresses who I am, at least in terms of my personality type. And there are problems, there's difficulties, but there's a lot to appreciate and value, and I have a lot of sixes in my life. I don't know why. Somehow
So do I. Yeah.
and we don't even always like each other, but boy, can we be friends and solid together,
Yeah.
There's so much to value about the sixes. So,
And I think a lot of sixes, if they feel they can trust the eight, they're really devoted friends.
yeah.
And they'll know the shortcomings of their eight friend or coworker, but they'll just get the eight. But they like the protection that eight gives, that is something they can count on.
Right.
So that pairing happens a lot. Or it can be the other way around, and the six can be very suspicious of anyone that's that confident. In fact, usually in the beginning, eights just come across too confident, and sixes will say, yeah, I just don't trust anybody that confident, because they might do something dangerous because they're overly confident.
Right. And there may be some truth in that.
There is. There
definitely
is a lot of truth.
We have to cooperate and from each
Yeah.
other, support one another,
There's way too much truth. And I think every type has that kind of truth.
Yeah.
So like in 1978, of course, that was before we had the books. And actually, when I started in 85, the books weren't available. By then, there was a nun that had published a book, and O'Leary and Beesing and Novosek had published a book.
But it wasn't our
It wasn't. Yes,
and
it wasn't available.
Jesus, journey through each of the nine.
Yeah, exactly. And that was it. So we really had to learn from a community or group. I happen to have been taught by someone who took a year-long course with Kathy Spieth. So I was fortunate, but I didn't know about all you characters in Berkeley. I really didn't, because think about it. We didn't have the internet. We didn't advertise in that way. If you were in the community, you would find it, but I was just enough further out.
Well, that's too bad. I wish we.
Yeah. Well, we met, like, really briefly in 94 at the conference, but then I got to know you in like January of 95. I remember that vividly.
Right. That's great. Yeah.
Quite endearing. And the communities that emerged around each teacher were pretty phenomenal, because we became the community. And personally, I enjoyed so much meeting people that knew their Enneagram type, that could laugh at their type, or could share how hard it was to be in life with their type, and both. And that was pretty significant with the panel method. So when did you start teaching the Enneagram? So you learned about it in 78.
I got to go ahead from Kathy Spieth to do a study group in 81. So that was my first study group. And then maybe a year or two later, a couple of years later, I started doing my own panels because she had moved out of town and she wasn't doing her panel series the way she used to. So I stepped in. There was still a community around my, Center for Human Growth. And so I stepped in and started doing panels. And then in 91, I had to let go of that center for various reasons. One, the rent just kept climbing, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
just like an 8, right? I had the biggest dance studio in
Yeah.
town. So when the rents went up, we were dead in the water. Those other little studios are still there, but anyway, there's an 8 thing. And then of course having kids, trying to have kids. And so and Helen was doing this training program, she had actually started in 88, but I didn't need to be trained as an Enneagram teacher. I was already there, right? But I went in 91 because I wanted the community.
Yes.
And I got the community. I also got a very good training,
Yes.
which I wasn't looking for, but
Amazing training.
it was a great training. And there was this guy, this psychiatrist guy from Stanford who like, please, no psychiatrists. I don't want to be around that. And I was like, dragged myself in. And here was this little guy who was just so warm and endearing, was
Yeah,
willing,
our beloved David Daniels.
he kind of won me over in about a day, so that was a added, benefit. So by the time it was 93 or 94, I was already being drafted to do stuff for them and kind of help run the
And so then I
internships.
saw you again there. Yeah. So I did the whole certification in 95. So I saw you on a number of occasions then.
Right.
That time frame. And of course, every event thereafter, it was called the oral tradition then, for people who know that the narrative tradition was originally called the oral tradition. But it was pretty amazing. And remember when I did the intimacy research with the Enneagram types, and then we were at a Silomar for the yearly meeting, and that whole meeting was on the instincts.
Right.
The subtypes. It was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had because people were so forthcoming. And a lot of people at that time just only knew the subtypes at a cursory level. Now, that wasn't true for you. You knew a lot early on. And yet I was so amazed that male sexual 8s thought exactly the way I did. Gender did not matter.
Right.
And that was true in all the groups. We had a nice turnout too.
Yeah, we had like 25 out of 27. We should have had 27, but it didn't fall that way. But we had 25 out of the 27 subtypes there. And so when people got in subtype groups, there were 25 subtype groups, you know what I mean? Because we had 150 people to work with, and it was awesome. And sometimes you could just look around in the room, you know what I mean? And you could sense because now we're not just talking about Enneagram type, we're talking about the instincts, in the body. You could kind of sense these amazing varieties in the human community. I mean, it was right there, at least 25 out of 27, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember that. We were missing. Yeah.
We were missing a couple. Well.
Yeah.
But,
and the panels, it was the first time we did panels. Well, I guess I'd done panels privately, but it was the first time we did it within the community on each instinct. And yeah, as a group, I think we felt forever changed because we knew our types, but there was something about coming together with people that some of whom we knew and others that maybe were new teachers that came in along the way. But it was another life-changing experience. And it was my second, it was my fourth research study, but it was the second one that included the subtypes and to find that it didn't matter and it was statistically validated, the instincts, because there were 4 clusters. And one cluster was everything having to do with what would be painful or disappointing in a relationship. So whether it was cheating or a spouse being mean in their words or what have you. That was universal. But thereafter, there were 3 distinct clusters that were based on the instincts. So it was pretty amazing to have someone at Davis, UC Davis, confirm that.
Right. Well, that was great. I mean, you were always doing the research, which I want to thank you for. And you know, I mean, I hope the research is again is available, and if it could be more available if it needs to be, because you know, people are always saying, well, where's the research? Well, we don't have a lot of research, but if when we do have research, it's often from your corner of
Yeah,
the
I
neck of
did put up the one that David and I did on Tritype, the theory and practice, on both my web pages. So if people want to read how the lexicon came into being and how it influenced things, and the questions and the point system used, the one that was in the IEA journal.
right.
But any style, the book is research right there. A lot of my books are the research studies themselves. I've done 24 now. And I'm still, by the way, working with Joyce Meng on the Enneagram types and Myers-Briggs, which I started in like 94, where I would do panels with the local community that studied the personality types. And we'd correlate it. We'd do 9 panels, but show the difference in the Myers-Briggs type. And that was a lot of fun and very meaningful. And then I did a study in 2014, kind of on everything I ever wanted to ask. And that was included, and I saw more patterns. But really, I want a study that has at least 100,000 people to see the subtype, the Myers-Briggs type, and the tritype, to really kind of hone in on the language used specifically by them. So what are you doing as a general course, Peter? What classes have you taught? What do you enjoy teaching? Do you have anything coming up?
I am just putting together my programs for the fall, and you know, of course, I'm still working closely with the narrative. So I do trainings with the narrative, although the narrative is kind of broadened and expanded, and now there's many more faculty members there, which in the big picture is a good thing. So we've got our trainings there, and then I do certain things. Like you know, I have study groups. You know, study groups. It's wonderful to have small groups of
Yes.
people to really dive deeply. So I've got study groups opening up, and I've got we have this fun experience in Las Vegas together coming up in
Yes, in
October.
October. Watch for
You
that.
know,
And what are you teaching there? What's your topic?
uh, well, I'll be doing something on subtypes and something on the embodied Enneagram. And you know, I'm still traveling to some degree, less so than before, but I've got a couple programs in Singapore in November, and one is on the embodied Enneagram, and this time it's not just the experiential embodied Enneagram, it's actually a train the trainer, part of a process, because as I get older, you know, you know, you understand, we want to
I
pass these on to
understand.
people, you know, so you know, there's stuff like that, and I'm sure there's other things too that
Yeah, it'll come. So when did you first meet Kathy Spee and Claudio or any of the other teachers?
well, I met Kathy in 78, and she immediately became, for our group, smaller group inside this community, she became a therapist and a mentor, an introduction to the Gurdjieff work. I mean, we had 8 very intense years with her, and I'm a changed person as a result. You know, I went through profound, into the depths, you know, broke through a lot of my defenses, and I was held very well by her in that process, was able to kind of come through it. And of course, Claudio wasn't active at that time. He was in poor health, and so he wasn't doing a lot of teaching, but he'd show up here and there. And, you know, I remember a very sweet scene one time. I was going over to Kathy's place for therapy, and I'm coming through the backyard to her little, you know, place, and she's there cutting his hair. You know what I mean? It was kind of a sweet moment.
Yeah.
He was also popped in. We used to rent out our center for different teachers, and so I remember him being there to do a day-long program at one point. And So he was definitely around. But Kathy was my therapist, Enneagram teacher, and again, mentor in the
And mentor, yeah, yeah.
project book. So
Well, she really is responsible for getting the material into our hands because Naranjo had signed the confidentiality agreement and didn't want to violate it. And Ichazo's thinking he had violated it. He asked for confidentiality from others, but both Oakes and Spieth did share on the topic.
yeah, and and Kathy was, I have to say, she was part of the development of the modern Enneagram. I mean,
I
she
agree.
worked very closely with Claudio, and she was a brilliant psychologist, and so she brought a lot of psychology to the Enneagram. And you remember we just had these very simple descriptions of the types.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot around it, and so and many people have contributed over the years, and it's still a developing system.
Yes.
Back at that time, Kathy Spieth was teaching, Helen Palmer was teaching, and they were both adding pieces to this. And of course, there was things going on in Chicago at Loyola University, but we didn't know about that until the big
Exactly.
conference in '94. And
Exactly.
Catholics showed up from around the world and like, where did you come from? I said, oh yeah, we're from Ireland, and oh yeah, everybody in the parishes knows something about the Enneagram, and or Sister Suzuki from Japan.
Yeah.
Got to drive her up and down the boulevard at Stanford in my big old, van, what I mean, two-seater van, and it helped Sister Suzuki get up into the van and down. I mean, it was just an honor to meet her, and she was, of course, the primary teacher in Japan for many, many years.
Yeah.
And
This
so people like that showed up in '94 at the conference. You were there,
was pretty transformational. That's when I realized I would have enough people to do a more meaningful study because I had done 400 Enneagram lovers, those of us that were passionate about the Enneagram and or taught the Enneagram. And then I found 100 people that would never want to do it and just kind of got them to fill out the questionnaire and do the 3-hour interview. I don't know how I did, but I
I
persuaded them.
can imagine how you did it, right?
I just said that you need to be represented thing. And but then at the conference, I'm saying, oh, what a perfect group, because some knew subtypes, some didn't. They lived in different countries, they had different teachers. And I wanted to find out what was confluent. And so I kind of immediately said, I'm doing research. Would you join in? And they all said yes. And so then I got a much larger number. And then became the basis of what we decided to do in '96 when David Daniels said the IEA is not going to make it unless we create an event. Katherine, will you pull together the people you know? I'm sure he probably called you as well. And then on that committee, I said, we should ask people what they want most. But I think it's going to be to understand these differences in these schools of thought. And David Daniels was hoping for a unified description so that we were all using the same description of the types. I didn't think that would happen because people had invested so much,
Sure.
but we could find out the common denominators either way.
Yeah.
And that was an extraordinary conference. What was your experience of seeing the teachings and how they varied?
Well, it was fascinating, of course, and
Yes.
I mean, this was before Don believed in subtypes, for example. So
Exactly.
he
Yeah.
had his own view, and there was a lot of value in his view. I wasn't actually expecting everybody to agree. I just thought that I mean, there was also the first time that the business applications showed up. I remember, I had a colleague at that point, and we came in with a handbook on the business applications to leadership, and you know what I mean. And other people spoke about that too, and that was like brand new in '94.
That's Susan.
That was Susan
Yeah.
Forrester,
Yeah.
and it turned out we were a little ahead of our time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
You don't want to be too ahead of your time because then,
I taught it in business as well, Peter, as you know, but I was going into businesses that already knew me in another capacity. So
yeah,
it was just another thing that I was adding.
they liked you. So
Yeah. So whatever I taught, they were going to take. And so I taught them the Enneagram.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had
Yeah,
to
I
change
have to
some.
say at the conference, one of my favorite parts was I got the student union one day to present the embodied Enneagram. It was my first public presentation about the embodied Enneagram. And we had a blast. And I'm having everybody do stretching and breathing exercises and you know what I mean? And it was just, it was summertime in California. We were in the middle of Stanford University, and it just felt like this was a new chapter for the Enneagram.
It
And
really
it was.
was. It
Yeah.
kind of brought us all together. And then 1996 was the first conference as the IEA. And then there was this meld where it did emerge that if you didn't know the subtypes, you didn't have the distinguishing factors between people that were difficult to type,
Right.
especially if you were emotional, you were made of 4.
Right.
They didn't understand the intimate or the social. You were considered a head type. So it really, Naranjo's contribution was huge. And then Kathy disseminating on that, and Helen getting it out there. And then Tom brought things in. But you were teaching it all along. So how did you end up like focused on the subtypes? Because you're one of the finest teachers of the subtype material.
Well, I was just drawn to that in part because, again, as a body type, we're talking about the body center. We're talking about the instincts, and my sense then, of course, I have it much more worked out in certain language these days. But we go around in the modern world thinking we're like making decisions from our mind, and we're just deciding what to do and how to, it's like actually a lot of our life is being driven by instinct and emotion.
Yeah.
And we got to work with that in our
Yeah.
personal lives, but we also have to work with that stuff in the communities because, if you don't understand the impact of instinct and emotion, you just don't get it. You know what I mean? You don't understand people. It's not all in the mind. The mind is really important. I get that, but it's much more than the mind. So here was a part of the Enneagram that included the heart center and the body center, the somatic aspects, and how the heart center and the body center kind of intersected in these very fascinating, complex ways.
Yes. And do you remember I think it was 2003 or 4, where we both had contracts with the Federal Reserve and we went
Oh,
in
yeah.
every month on
Yeah.
the instincts alone?
They were, I've never seen anybody so, I mean, of course, Diane and her
Diane was
board,
something else, wasn't
they were really dedicated to the Enneagram. I think sometimes more than the people in their groups wanted to hear about, but it didn't matter. We were going to teach the Enneagram, and we had that whole series at one point just on the subtypes.
Yeah.
They
And
became
both of
the
us were
experts on
coming in
subtypes.
separate from each other. So they
Right.
were getting a full dose.
They were. Yeah.
And I remember one time, one of the managers said, "Oh, we should do a movie." And I go, "Okay, you pick the movie, but there have to be a lot of characters in there to kind of give a rough feeling of what types they might be, or their instinct, if that showed up." I go, "But they're kind of incomplete characters." So then she was really high up, but she brought in The Godfather. And as we're watching The Godfather, she said, "I think this violates many of the different things that we say here at this institution." But
Right.
actually, it turned out to be a really good movie for snapshots of aspects of the types, because the characters were really well written.
Right.
But
I'm
yeah,
sorry I missed that one. That would have been fun to be
oh
there.
yeah, we had popcorn, we did the whole
Right.
thing, and we're stopping the movie and debating it. But that's what I liked about Diane, is she was so progressive and she wanted people to be interested, and was trying to find all these vehicles to engage them. So if it wasn't one way, it'd be another. And
Right. Well, it was really a learning for me also that people in other territories, that smart people, usually, it's not always, but intelligent people look at the Enneagram and go, oh, this can really be helpful. You know what I mean? And could pick up on it and were willing to learn it because they got it. They got the value of it. And that to me was that was good to know, that we weren't just like coming in as these kind of strange
Yeah, exactly.
psychology people, that actually there was a reception there. People could pick up on it, and that's been borne out over the years since, right? Since the 20 years after that time, and seeing how it spread through so many organizations, and also, I say organizations, not just business, but also nonprofits and church congregations,
Yep.
people get it, usually.
Well, it has meaning when you meet people as 14-year-olds. I taught to private school where they taught the Enneagram at 14. And it was a year-long course, so I could let it unfold. And then at the same time, I did the class with Team 5 at the Federal Reserve and other teams, but that was very meaningful because it was like the top kind of world understanding. And then in the prison system in 1995, and then again later in 2015, 14 or 15. Yeah, I guess I started in 14, but continued through 15. And I'm just thinking, okay, here are these 14-year-olds. Here are these that are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, and these people making decisions at a top executive level that influences the dollar. And they would say the same things. And it was just so confluent, again, like the panels we're talking about, where age didn't matter. We gain experience with age that is incredibly important. But like Janet Yellen was in that class. And I remember that there were 2 8s in that class, the LA branch and the San Francisco branch. And the gentleman in the San Francisco branch said, we're never going to get the top job, because they were on Team 5. And he said, we're too much like a sore thumb. We say things we shouldn't at the wrong time. But Janet, she's going to get the top job. We're all smart, but she, on the other hand, does not make waves. But she'll stand up for what she believes in. She's not weak. She'll hold steady. And it was a fascinating class because it was the 5 people on Team 5, and then they each brought 2 key people. And so it was only 15 people. But they got it. And the head of the San Francisco branch said, of course we get it, Katherine. Money is progressive. It's the most progressive, probably industry, so to speak. I had never considered that until then, because I was thinking, well, I knew industries that were progressive, but they were an early adopter, a lot of it because of Diane, because she just kept introducing it to them. And then I'd come in, I'd teach statistics, or I'd teach other divisions. Did you as well teach other divisions at the Federal Reserve?
Mostly I was teaching the IT groups. So
Per group. Yeah.
we had more, you got around more, I think, to the.
Yeah, I ended up teaching in every division, which really was the foundation for me understanding, again, that it didn't matter if it was people that were doing the infrastructure. Those managers had the same dilemmas and problems as the people that were in BS&R, and who were more extroverted, and a lot of kinesthetic gut types in the infrastructure that were doing the physical buildings and repairs or changing things, versus those that were socially the regulators, going out and regulating. They're more like the Green Berets or the Army Rangers, the heads of those departments, because they have to be attorneys and they have to be really tough. And at one time they were both counterphobic 6s, and I thought, makes sense. And it really good. They weren't going to back off from a fight. But this one person was actually a ranger, just a wonderful man. And he wanted his team members to work like a team, like one mind. And he kept saying, Katherine, you need to get them like we were as rangers. And I go, it's not going to happen. You have some types in there to be very suspicious of that. And that they're, the 1 through 6, leading with 6 is going to be pretty like, wait, I'm not paid to do that. I said, as a counterphobic 6, of course you want to do that. 638. And, but it was so enlightening. What would you say is something that in the business world or in the private sector that was especially meaningful to you? Because you went everywhere representing the narrative tradition and yourself.
I had right. I went out with the narrative training program, and then I went out with my own workshops, and I got to a lot of different places in the world. Actually, taught in 15 countries, and just
Excellent.
got back from Denmark actually, which was number 15, kind of cool.
Yeah.
But I was just so impressed at being in China for so many years. I went there for 15 years, usually twice a year, and in a lot of different places. But the enthusiasm, the sincerity of the young Chinese who one, they wanted to use the Enneagram to become more successful.
Yes.
I mean, and that's fine. But they also wanted their relationships to work better because they've been through so much in previous generations, and that's really messed up the attachment, secure
Yes, of
attachment for them.
course.
And they want, they really wanted their relationships, their family relationships to work better. And a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them, they wanted to have an inner life. And they so much wanted to be seen and kind of seen for who they were rather than just as part of the collective. And so they were so enthusiastic about getting on panels and talking that one of the challenges was like, okay, all right, time,
Now
we
you
have
can,
to move on.
yeah, yeah.
But it was kind of an innocence, I guess, that spoke to me, and the fact that this is something that I never actually prioritized for my own development or my own relationships was the being seen and understood part. We talk about love and connection as it's expressed in
Oh,
3 different centers. And of course, the gift of of love from the head center is the seeing, the deep seeing and appreciation and valuing of the other person. And when I realized, and that never been a big deal for me, but I realized in China that that's what I was doing. I was empathizing with them too, but I wasn't going to be around that long, and I certainly wasn't doing much out of my body center for them. I mean, but they so much needed to be kind of seen and valued, and that could happen in the space of a 6-day training, and it meant so much to them.
yeah. And you're the perfect example of the 8 with the tri-type of the 3 hexad, like we define 8 with the 8, the 5, and the 2. So just your presence physically is solid. I've always felt that. But you have a big heart as well, Peter, that even if you are just witnessing something, but of course you say kind things too, like the 2, you have that sympathetic countenance that is very noteworthy. And so the 3 together is quite powerful. And I'm sure it made an extraordinary difference. And all the people that know you and know
people I will never see again.
yeah.
Some people I saw on a regular basis in China, but most of the people I would see once or twice, or maybe they get certified in the program. But at a certain point, I knew that I was never going to see them again. And that was a little bit troubling to me. As an 8, I had to realize that I couldn't stay connected through my body or my instincts. I couldn't even really be active through my heart center. But what I could do is understand that there was the value in like, again, the seeing of who they were, that they could take with them. And so anyway, that made a big impression on me. And I am also bringing it up because it was a big part of my Enneagram work over that period of time.
Yes, yes. No, I study cultures as well with the Enneagram, and now with all that's available on like Netflix and Hulu, and you get things from different cultures across the world, and whatever TV shows that are that popular to make it, let's say in the US, it's a snapshot of what the culture pays attention to and the scenarios and the values. And if you watch the Chinese movies or TV shows in particular, there is this fantasy of the ideal and wanting to fulfill the higher attributes that were taught from, well, since Confucius and others, that were that message got in, and of course, Buddha. So, and then the part of the Chinese that I work with that aren't in China, but their families from China, they still have that desire to be elevated. So I think I can touch into what you're saying of wanting that inner world. And it wasn't necessarily what was pursued as a culture for many years, but it was definitely groupthink.
Yeah. And also because of the one child policy that was there for many decades. And I understand the reasons for that.
Yeah.
But the families who had one child, there was so much expectation put on that child.
Yes.
Certainly in the middle class families or the upward moving families. And that the child, you know, male or female, was carrying so much responsibility for living up to those expectations, living up to the ideal. And there was just this really poignant desire to be seen as who they are. At least
Yes.
that was my
Yeah.
experience. Those are the people that came to the Enneagram work anyway.
Yes, exactly. And I have clients all over the world that are Chinese, but in other countries.
Right.
Those values are pretty universal. It's an ancient culture. So wherever they are, it stays generation to generation to generation.
Right.
And the Indian culture is very similar no matter where they are in the world. Two very ancient cultures. Did you ever teach in Israel?
No.
Israel was fascinating because there were those that whose families remained in Israel, never left. And it's very 8. It's totally type 8. And then there's the faction that of those that came from Europe to find a new place to live after the terrible suffering of World War II. And their dynamics, you know, they're to the locals, they are not real Israelis. But if you think about it, it hasn't even been 100 years yet. Of course, that would be true because it takes generations. But they're like coexisting in a very meaningful way, yet they all go and spend their time in a kibbutz to become proficient and protect their borders. And when you're at a restaurant, there's someone sitting with a machine gun so that if anyone's threatening those that are having a meal, so you tip the person with the machine gun for protecting you. And I thought, wow, I have never had that happen in California or any place in the United States, but where I tip someone to protect us, but all their, you know, those blood feuds that go back centuries, really.
Right. Yeah.
And that influences the level of anxiety that they feel and the being ready. And each country taught me that. One that I laughed at is Italy, where they were, did you ever teach in Italy? Very friendly. Yeah, so we went different places. We could put it all together.
Right.
Whereas they wanted to record the meeting and everything. I gave my permission, and then they all had their phones turned on. So instead of vibrate, they all, and I'm just thinking, wait, don't you guys want to like not have the phones? Or your recording is going to be interrupted constantly. And they go, oh, no, we're used to it.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So it was the first class I ever taught where
the phones are going off, right?
Going on, yeah, and it was a few days. So I'm just thinking, eventually it was like when they were, you know, breaking up the concrete outside. Oh, okay, there's your phones going on. But it was fascinating to me. No one was offended. They were all used to it, but they wanted their phone sound. They didn't want the vibration that would let them know. But they were just so enthusiastic, and a very 7 culture, in my opinion. That's 7-2.
Yeah, a lot of 7-2.
Yeah. They just kind of pull up wherever they want and leave their vehicle. Right. And it's not even a parking place. Yeah, okay, that's 7-2.
7-2, right.
Teaching in each country is meaningful, really meaningful.
Yeah.
and it exposes us to different things. But I love the universality of the Enneagram that brings us all together.
Right.
Because
Well, we didn't know that at first, did we? We thought maybe this is just a California thing. And then it was like, maybe it's just an American thing. And then maybe it's just like a Western. And the truth is, now that we've been all these places, the types are there, right? And there's a cultural overlay, but the types are all there. There may be a more predominance of
yes,
two
yes,
types, but everybody's there and we can recognize them. And when we get to talk with people, they'll tell you if we have good enough rapport, if we have good enough questions, if we have good enough acceptance, they will just say, yes, this is how it is for me. This is how I see the world. And there are the types.
type is the type wherever they are. I remember being in Australia, Peter, and you were there, right?
Yeah.
In 2000, I think it was. And the threes kind of pulled me aside and said, oh, I'd love to live in the United States. You're a three culture here. It's just, you can't be a three. We're put down for being threes. And the eights and nines said, yeah, we cut them like the tall poppies.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, I hadn't thought about that. Well,
Right.
it's kind of hard if you're not a three in a three culture, because
Right. Then you're not good enough for living up to the
no, you have rough edges, especially a female eight. But
yeah, female eights, that's a tough one, right? Bad enough you're an eight, but here you're a woman,
yeah,
This used to bug me about the threes. They could be so kind of aggressive in their own way,
yes,
and it was socially acceptable.
yeah,
Please don't take it
they knew
personally.
how to do it in a way I didn't. It
But
was
we didn't, we when we're aggressive, we always get in trouble.
because we just say it, and then we're over it. But
Right.
but they kind of, like at the training with Naranjo, there was originally a smaller number of people in the 1996 training, but I think there were supposed to be like 35 people, but there ended up being 78. Now, there's two things that went very wrong because of that. Only some of us had name tags,
Right.
and only some of us had chairs.
Oh,
Watching people coming from these different schools of thought together, my first impulse was just to take over. I'd get to, because I worked with hotels all the time. I knew, how to make that happen. And if they couldn't, we could get things ordered in. And I go, stop, Katherine. You're not in charge.
right.
Not an executive that needs to handle this. And besides, let's see what happens. And sure enough, Naranjo didn't do a thing. His assistant didn't do a thing. So I asked Naranjo, I said, you didn't do anything because you wanted to see what we'd all do, right? And he said, well, if you're going to study, you wanted to see how things fall out.
Right.
Yeah, I figured that out, because people that were really well behaved with Hurley and Donson, or Don and Rusty, or Helen and David, and that crew were really distraught that they didn't have a chair. But the threes, they managed to get their chair or get right in front of Naranjo.
Right.
So that they were at his feet in a way. And where, being a gut type, I'd already figured out where I wanted to sit, and I'd already marked my territory. So I didn't have that problem. But I remember understanding that we revert really to our survival strategies or our natural impulse. So mine was to take charge. There was no one in charge. Someone needed to take charge. But because I knew the Enneagram, I could just let it unfold. And then I didn't miss the opportunity to study these very same people in difficult circumstances.
That's such a big deal for type 8 when you can say, you know what, this is not my place to take charge.
Yeah.
It's just such a big deal, because we naturally will take charge. If somebody else is not in charge, we'll start taking charge. And maybe we don't want to do that all the time.
Yeah. Oh, Peter, it's just a delight. I could go on for hours. And I must say, you're really an extraordinary person personally, as a teacher, and your work with the subtypes and body work and the Enneagram in general. I just can't say enough about you. And I look forward to seeing you physically in person in Las Vegas when we
Okay.
teach.
Thanks so much for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you.